Good morning. We'll have opening prayer and then we'll have silent prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, we thank you for the promise that one day soon we will never part again. We pray that we would be faithful unto death, that you would help each of us to, in our daily struggles, our perplexities, our trials, to trust you fully, to direct our path and to speak to us words of comfort and peace and joy. We thank you for your Holy Spirit who's guiding us into all truth, and we thank you that he is the comforter. Please comfort our hearts this morning. We thank you for this preparation day. We pray that you prepare us, not just physically that we would be ready, but spiritually and mentally to enter into fellowship with you for the Sabbath, the last Sabbath that we'll be together. We thank you now for the blessings of being in this place, and we pray that you would pour your Holy Spirit into our hearts to give us that peace and that love for one another that you want us to have, and for the world at large. We thank you now and we praise you, and we ask that you would take over. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Be with us, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So last lesson, we were concluding our study on the mustard seed, and that's not to say it's probably finished. There's probably more to this than meets the eye. And I'm sure there's more text we could look at about the least and the greatest as well. I did have more text, but I know we're running out of time, and you can do that in your own time. So we...
I can't hear you.
Oh, that's because I'm not supposed to this on. Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so we've been looking at the parable of the mustard seed, and we looked at the last thing we looked at was the fact that it was teaching us about the least to the greatest, and that there's this concept of least and greatest that Christ was addressing in the context of the work that the church was about to do in terms of witnessing to the Gentiles. And in this history, we saw that Jew and Gentile was a test for them, that they had to change their whole viewpoint of the Gentile, that they are now required not to go and overthrow the Romans and throw out the Gentiles and set up this great kingdom that they thought they were going to be part of. But they had to humble themselves, go through the cross, and then give this gospel to the Gentiles, minister to the Gentiles, eat with them, basically serve them. And we saw this principle brought out in this passage we looked at about being that they weren't to be chiefs or servants or great, because they were to become servants and ministers. And we saw that Christ, the Son of Man, who was the chief of all, the greatest of all, came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and give his life as a ransom for many. And we looked at about them, the whole battle with the disciples, that they wanted to be the greatest, that they wanted to sit on his right and left. James and John sent their mother to ask Jesus if they could sit on the right hand and the left hand. And we looked at that imagery a little bit, how the sheep are on the right and the goats are on the left. And in the Last Supper, how John was on the right and Judas was on the left, as a kind of object lesson of the two classes at the end of the world. And this is, in the way Jesus answers is, he says, it's not for me to put that position, it's in the Father's hands. And I think you could read into that, it's up to the Father, but we know it's up to us. It's basically up to us what character we develop to decide what side we're on. And we see the two thieves of this imagery as well, these two classes on either side of the cross of Christ. And those classes are determined on whether we're willing to pick up the cross. So we saw that obedience involves a cross, and that this test in this time period for them, one of the tests was equality over Jew and Gentile. And this is, the mustard seed is teaching us more than just the growth of the truth and the growth of the church. And at every stage, it gets more and more information, more and more truth. We saw that with our lives. And the glory or the latter rain of our Christ, it swells. Is this progressive work that's done in the life of a person and also in the church at large, which then fits them for service as the tree becomes fully formed. It has these branches which now the birds can nest in. And we looked a little bit about branches being knowledge and prophetic truth. It's a body of doctrine and a body of people reflected who are messengers for that doctrine. And they'll give a message to the world which will harvest the Gentiles and be this place of refuge for the oppressed. And we looked at that too, about oppression and liberty, and how if they build their homes in their branches, they're comfortable. It's a place of safety. It's a place of sealing because they're settled into the truth in that time period. And then Christ can come. So we saw too that this equality issue is that they're tested on the fact that who Christ is, because he doesn't look like a king. He doesn't look great like they think he's going to. And they're tested on their view of the Gentiles, who they think are least of all people. They've got no worth. They're less than the Jews. They're even like animals. And this is the picture we're given in the New Testament of the Gentiles. So they have to switch their view of both things. They have to see Christ, who he is in how he looks. He looks the least, but he's really the greatest, but it doesn't look like they think. And the same with the Gentiles. So they're tested on these two levels. And then, of course, that reflects on themselves, how they see themselves, and how they have to be willing now to go out and give this gospel to the world. So this is our test, and this is what we want to look into more now. So we're going to shift subjects, and we're going to move into looking at Jacob's time of trouble. And this is in connection also with Galatians 3:28. I'm going to leave that up then. So what we see in Galatians 3:28, if somebody wants to turn there, we'll just read Galatians 3:28 and 29 again, in the context of this subject of Jacob's time of trouble.
There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ. And if ye be Christ, then are ye Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise.
So we have a promise here that if you recognize these three things, that there is neither Jew nor Greek, bond nor free, male or female, that you become a seed of Abraham and an heir of Christ, well, a child of Christ. And so we want to understand what that looks like and what that means. So we constantly reference back to Abraham, and he's doing that in the language of the Jews, but we know it has prophetic significance that they're seed of Abraham. So I think we need to understand the seed and Abraham and what that means to be a seed or a posterity or a generation of Abraham, born to Abraham. What does that look like? And I want to look at that in the context of Jacob's time of trouble and of these issues of equality and prejudice in terms of that. Because we need to understand why Jacob's in this time of trouble. We're in a time of trouble, we believe now. We're in a time period of Jacob's time of trouble on the line. And we need to look at his experience and say, why was he in that trouble? What's he doing? And how did he get there? And I think if we trace down from Abraham the issues that were faced by Abraham and Isaac, and why Jacob's standing in the position he's standing, I think we'll have more understanding of not only sins of our fathers on one level, because we talk about the sins of our fathers, but we talk about it on a prophetic level. So we can look at this on a prophetic level, and that's what I wanted to do, but it becomes practical and personal, because we're looking at the subject of equality, which is a prophetic subject now, and we know it's involved with morality. We need to look back at Jacob and see what issues was he facing, and what was the root of these issues. And this is the seed. So we need to contrast the seed of the woman, which all of us are under. When we're born, we are seed of the woman. We're seed of literal Abraham in a sense, although we're not literal Jews, but we're all humanity. But this contrast now with the seed of Abraham, a true seed of Abraham, is Christ and its divinity. So he's wanting us to see something about humanity and divinity in this parable of being a seed of Abraham. So I want us to look back and see why Jacob was wrestling. So let's turn to Genesis 32, and we'll just read. We're going to be reading some spirit prophecy and a lot from Genesis to get an understanding of this progression of how Jacob got to where he got. So let's look at Genesis 32, 22 to 32. I'm assuming everyone's fairly familiar with these things, but we may not have read them for some time.
What was the verse, sorry?
It's 32, 22 to 32. So it's Genesis 32. It's 22 to 32. And this is where we see Jacob blessing. So we just want to read that.
And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day.
Oh, do you want to like
Oh,
22?
22, sorry. Okay.
Get the context.
And he rose up that night and took his 2 wives and his 2 women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford to Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. And as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh in the sinew that shrank.
So what's happening here? Henry, what's going
on? Well, first of all, the very first thing was he separated his family from himself, trying to protect them because of fear of Ishmael.
Esau.
Yeah.
I know,
Okay.
it's always hard to get all these names correct. Go on.
Yeah, and so then, now he was praying, and during this year time, he was wrestling with Christ, who came, because he thought it was an enemy, and then being a long wrestle, eventually, he was getting a little bit weaker, I guess, or whatever the situation is here, and then near the morning, that's when the angel touched his thigh, or indicating, where it would come out of place, and it did so, and he recognized that it was not just any angel, and so that's why he also asked of his name. And so from this point on, he was being blessed, and after the blessing, of course, he had to pursue in this blessing too. He was asking it. That's why he wouldn't let go until he got that blessing. And so now, after the blessing, now he hobbled back, I guess.
Yeah. Wrestled with him until his thighs out of joint. Apparently, that's very painful. So he knew that it was God once his thigh was out of joint.
Yeah.
And why is he, and what happens to him as well? What is God's name? In verse 28.
What happens to him? He gets a new name.
So he gets a new name from Jacob. Does everyone know what Jacob means?
Supplanter.
Supplanter. So he's replaced Esau. He's in the place of supplanter, but supplanter implies that you've done it deceptively. So it's deception, and it is not good name, and it's changed to Israel, which means
Prince of
a
God.
prince that has power with God or overcomer and has prevailed. So this is where he transitions from being a deceiver or we could just say on a basic level a sinner to being, so it means heel catcher, that is supplanter. It's almost like he tried to grab the heel before he came out. Is that the way around it was? He tried to be first, but Esau was still first in coming out. And all his life he was trying to get the blessing from Esau. And so this is a transition in his experience here from
Sorry, supplanted, that's what I meant.
supplanter, yeah. Supplanter. And supplanter means
Not supplanted.
supplanter. So it's similar, but yeah, he's the one doing the action.
Yes, you are.
Supplanter. That is SUPP.
No, it's not. So how do you spell
One of the supplants, it's the line, one that supplants. So
it? So it's supplant.
supplant.
And it means to deceive, like you said.
It means the bottom of the foot to trip up the heel, to plant it down the bell, to remove or displace by stratagem. Yeah, so you're removing something or displacing it by stratagem, which means like by strategy or deception really. To displace and take the place of other rivals, supplants another in the affections of his mysteries. To overthrow or undermine. So he's overthrown or undermined Esau in this deception. Yes, remove or displace by stratagem. So it's similar to deception. So his name is changed now to Israel, which we loosely translate as overcomer. He has power with God. What do we say when someone's name changes? What do we say is a symbol
Of new birth.
So new birth, or he's entered into covenant. Okay, so why is he in this position? When Brother Henry, you said that when he separated his wives and children, he's afraid of Esau. What's the problem? Why is he afraid of Esau?
Because Esau was coming against him with an army.
400 men, Esau's marching against him. Why? What's the story?
Well, that was going back into his past where he had, well, the firstborn was supposed to get the inheritance, and Jacob wanted to give that to Esau instead of, not Jacob, Isaac wanted to give it to Esau instead of Jacob, because Jacob, when he was born, I guess, just pulled the heel back of his brother and then came out in place of Esau. But they recognized that by tying ribbons on. But anyway, so then Jacob, of course, he deceived his father by putting on this hairy goat skin, making it feel like the skin of Esau, as Esau was a very hairy man. And so deceived his father into getting that birthright.
He wants the birthright. So this is all about the birthright. So he deceives Esau. And this is 20 years before. He's deceived Esau for his birthright, and then he has to flee to his relatives in
Yeah, his brother was angry.
Yeah, his brother was angry with him. So Esau's upset that Jacob's done this to him, and he wants revenge. So they think that Esau's going to kill him, and his parents, Rebecca recommends, and his father recommend that he goes to find a wife from his relatives because he's made this deception and to save his own life. And so he's on the run from Esau. So for those 20 years, even though when he leaves the place, he's on the journey, what happens to him on the journey to the relatives, to Laban's house?
The ladder.
He sees the ladder, he sees Jacob's ladder, and he has confidence that he's forgiven for this sin. But now 20 years later, we're revisiting this same sin, and he's wrestling because he thinks that Esau's coming to kill him. And in this wrestling, I want us to notice that the very thing that he's afraid of, that Esau's going to kill him, he thinks is happening. He doesn't know it's Esau. He doesn't think it's Esau, but he thinks it's an enemy. He's come to kill him now, and he's wrestling with this angel. So the very fear that he's actually got so much, is overwhelming him, is actually happening to him. And he's wrestling with this angel, and he doesn't recognize it's Christ, so he doesn't know who God is at this point. He doesn't recognize this is God. And it's only when he touches his thigh and he gets the pain that he recognizes this is God, which is quite another, I don't know, we need to reflect on what that lesson's teaching us. But he recognizes it's God, and from there on, he's not bothered about halting on his thigh. He's just conscious that he wants this blessing so badly from God, a spiritual blessing, this peace with God, that he is in this fight, this battle. So I want us to trace back this birthright. What is this birthright, and why is it so important to him? So let's go back to Abraham and see this covenant blessing that was given to Abraham. So this is all about relationships he's having with his father, his mother, Jacob is, and this is Isaac, the son of Abraham, because this promise has been given to Abraham in the beginning. So we just want to see a bit of the history of Abraham. Let's go back to Genesis 11. So Genesis 11 is where we get Abraham introduced. And we see that the Tower of Babel is this chapter. Then we get the descendants of Shem from verse 10 onwards. And then we come to verse 27 and we get Terah. And now Terah is being traced down in this genealogy, which we won't read. But if you see verse 26, it gives us Terah, and he's the father of Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. So Abraham has two brothers, Nahor and Haran, and these three are born to Terah, and Terah is a direct descendant of Shem. If we look back at verse 10, it says, these are the generations of Shem, who is the son of Noah. So we can see that this is a direct line here from the flood to Abraham. And I think if you work out the generations, he's actually the 21st generation from creation. But we can do that later. So he's directly descended to Noah, and the righteous side of Noah, which is Shem. And then we get to verse 27, and we'll read 27 to 30.
Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity, in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, and the father of Milcah, and the father of Isha. But Sarai was barren; she had no child. And Terah took Abram.
That's okay, 30, that's fine. 30. So we're just getting an overview of the descendants here of the genealogy of Abraham. So Abraham is born to Terah, and what we find here is Abraham's brother Haran dies before his father Terah in the land of his nativity. So this is an unusual circumstance in the history of the patriarchs. And I think Ellen White comments on this, that this man dies young. He dies before his father, which is very unusual in that time period because they lived for hundreds of years, and we don't know what he died of. But obviously, this impacts Abram, because whose father is Haran? Lot's father. So Lot's left an orphan in that sense. I mean, he's old now. I think Lot already has a wife at this point, but he's left without his father, and that may have actually helped him to make the decision to go with Abram. So we see how Lot's life is influenced here, and Abraham's life is influenced, because we know when Lot goes with Abraham, there's different things that come up. So here we see this interaction, how Haran dies, and it leaves Abraham with Nahor and his father Terah. And then they move on this journey, and before that, they take these wives. So we find that Abraham has Sarai, and Nahor has Milcah. And the interesting point I want to bring out about this is Sarai was what? She was barren. She had no child. Now, that implies to me that, how do they know that? How do they know she's barren? How would you know someone was barren? So Abraham's just married Sarai. Just married? No, let's say someone's just married. How would you know someone was barren?
Maybe that was in the culture to have children right away.
It may be the culture we do, but at least we know they must have been married for some time to make that
Yes.
assumption. So they've been married for some time, she's not having any children and she's barren. And this is interesting because it seems like this happens frequently. So she's barren. Who else is barren after that? The next one, Rebecca's barren. So in this line where they're promised this promise, and we'll see the promise in a minute, just bear in mind they're both barren. And so the very thing that God's telling them is going to happen doesn't seem to be able to happen on a human level. So then we go to Genesis 12, and he's called out here. Genesis 12, 1 to 4. If you can read that, please, Ray.
Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran.
So here we see that Abram is, how old is he?
75.
So let's see if Abram's in here. He's 75 years old. So he's quite old even when he's called on this journey. And he's called to leave his country. Does it say his kindred? Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from thy father's house. So there's three things: to leave his country, his kindred. What's the difference? Is there any difference? What do you think, Brother DeVay? What's the difference
Between what, sorry?
for these things he's asked to leave? So he's called to leave three things. He's called to leave his country, his kindred, and his father's house. And this is a big sacrifice back then. Well, it would be a sacrifice anyway, but back then people didn't really leave where they were born and where they grew up because there wasn't the knowledge, there wasn't the land, they didn't know where they were going, perhaps didn't have maps even. I don't even know the situation, but I know it wasn't normal for them to be asked to do this. So he's asked to leave his country. What's the difference between, obviously country is different from kindred and father's house. What's the difference between kindred and father's house?
If I noticed too, it goes down from the largest place, being the entire country, which is like a nation, to a kindred, which was from the lineage, and father's house being very personal, right at that level right there.
So yes, it's going down by steps. So if we say country is obviously your nation, and this is relatives, and this is your immediate family. Which is interesting because what happens? You think that meant leave his father, wouldn't you? But what happens? On the first part of this journey, he moves to Haran, and his father comes with him. And then he waits for his father to die, and it's a good couple of years, and then they move on again, and his household is increased by then, and then they move on to Canaan after that. So they have this stop on the way from Haran. And if anyone's ever looked at a map, does anyone know how far that is? So he's down here over the Chaldees, and this is in Babylon, and this is a really bad map, but this is Israel over here. And this is kind
Haran
of
is that far.
Babylon's here. And Haran's up here in the north of Syria, kind of way. Well, on the maps one I've looked in the past, this is about 400 miles, and this is about 400 miles as well. So you can check that, but that's the last time I looked at this, which was some time ago. I didn't do this recently, the distance. But this is a horrific distance, and we think, oh well, that's not that far. But when you're traveling with flocks and herds and relatives on donkeys and camels, that's quite a long way. So they stop here and they wait, and this is where Terah dies, the father, and then they move on down to Canaan. And he gets to Canaan, and then he goes down into Egypt, which is even further, obviously, the famine time. But this is quite a why does God ask him to do this? So he's got to leave his nation. So this is like us being asked to leave our country. So we're asked to leave Canada. We're asked to leave all our relatives behind and our immediate family. So this is a cut off from his heritage, his inheritance, his national background, his who he is, who he identified with, isn't it?
It's cut off from everything.
From everything. There's a severance here of these ties. Although obviously it's done in 2 steps with his father coming to him, and Lot goes with him. We do know that. So, but the principle is that he is told to leave all these people, and it's the talk of the town. The town would have been, in shock that, what are you doing? And you're listening to the voice of God, who you haven't seen, and nobody else is worshiping this God. He's surrounded by idolatry. His father has got some understanding of the true God, and that's why, but it's mixed with idolatry. And he's listening to a voice, and I wonder what Sarah is thinking. I wonder how she coped with this. We don't know what her reaction was. But what is the reason he gives? He says, I want you to leave your country, your father's house, unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. So he's promised, this is the promise.
He's promised everything he gave up.
He's promised everything he gave up, yes, but he's promised 1, a land, 2, that he'll make him a great nation. And what's the other thing? He'll bless him, make his name great. So maybe great nation stroke name great. And in those days, they would have understood that meant he would have had to have had children. This is your posterity. We're going to give you a lineage, make you a great nation, your name great. And I will bless them that bless thee, curse them that curse thee, and in thee all families of the earth will be blessed. All families of the earth blessed in him. And they understood that that was a promise of the Messiah. So this is a promise that the Messiah will come, because they knew that the Messiah would bless everybody. Promise of the Messiah. It makes that, I think it makes it clearer later, but that's what I'm telling you from the reading that I've done. So it says that he departs, and the Lord spoke to him, and Lot went with him, and he was 75 years old when he went out. And
So did he break the rules when he took his father and Lot?
it's a good question. I don't think there's any commentary that he did break the rules, and because it was a positive thing that Terah wanted to come, because he's following God as well in one sense. Because he's saying, well, if you're following this true God, I'm going to come with you in a way. I'm putting that in there. I haven't read the commentary on that recently, but I don't think it was negative. It says, and the next verse says, Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And Abram passed through the land into the place of Sichem, into the plain of Morah, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, so this is now verse 7, and to thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hay on the east, and there he built an altar unto the Lord, and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on till toward the south. So he's everywhere he goes, he builds an altar, and he's preserving the name of the Lord, and he's worshiping God. He's being faithful. He's praying everywhere he goes, because he has this trust in God. I want to turn to the commentary now on this first section, and it's Patriarchs and Prophets 1, 2, 5, 1 and 2.
Can I ask a question here?
Of course, yeah.
Now, Abraham, he was the firstborn of that family, wasn't he? Because it mentions here
I think he was the eldest from the verses that we
from
read.
Terah, there's Abraham, Nahor, and Haran, and Abraham is mentioned first. So he would have been the one that would have gotten the inheritance, wouldn't he? And yet he was the one that's commissioned here to leave his entire family and everything of the land and all. So that means he didn't get rid of the inheritance from the family, did he?
No, and that's a good point. I think he probably just walked away from everything, although his father came with him. So I don't know what that looked like, because his father left it too.
Right.
So whether
Stuff
his
you
father
can't
left it,
take.
this is the thing later, what happens is that you actually find the relatives are settled in Haran. Because when Jacob flees from Canaan to go back, he's going back to Haran where Laban lives, I think. So it's this stopping place on the way. So these relatives have moved to Haran. So whether they make their land there now, I'm not sure. I was going to say he left it to the other son that was left behind, which is probably what happened. And we don't hear of that again. I'm assuming. But yeah, it's a good point. So they would have left their land and their house. And to who, I don't know, maybe to the other son. The one that hadn't died, not Lot's father, the other one. But actually that doesn't fit really either. Because that's a good question I've not thought of. Because what is Nahor doing? Because isn't Nahor the father of Laban? We'll find that out as we go. I'm pretty certain that he's descended from, obviously because the other one died. I think Nahor is the father of Laban. So where we find them is not in Ur of the Chaldees. Nahor's wife was Milcah, and I think they have Laban. So that's an interesting point. So we'll keep that in the back of our heads because I don't know the answer to that right now. But yeah, if being the firstborn, if they have that, still had that tradition, I'm assuming even though they were going into idolatry, a lot of these people, whether it's still tradition to pass it down through the firstborn, because all we know is he gives him this promise here. That's what we know for sure.
And that's promised the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And say that all families of the earth will be blessed in you. So now this becomes like the right of the promise to the firstborn in a way, it seems. So let's trace it down. So we've got paragraphs and it's 1, 2, 5, 1 and 2. Let's just read that. So Henny, you've got paragraph 1. Actually, I want to cut into the paragraph here. I think it's halfway into the paragraph. Because there's a lot of good things we could read here, but I know we're not going to get through the material if we stop and look at everything.
Where does it start?
So what I'm trying to focus on is the link to Jacob, so bearing that in mind all the time. It starts, God has ever preserved a remnant. And I think that's halfway through 125.1.
It is.
so you want me to start in the middle of the paragraph somewhere?
Yeah. It just gives us the background that after Babel, what happened? He chooses Abraham.
I got it.
And Abraham's in the midst of superstition and heathenism.
And you want me to start it? How does it start?
God has ever preserved, right in the middle of the paragraph. It's about 5 lines down.
Okay.
Or maybe, sorry, start with, but the true faith is not to become extinct, because they've got
Okay,
a mixed with
gotcha.
idolatry.
Okay. So, but the true faith was not to become extinct. God had ever preserved a remnant to serve him. Adam, Seth, Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Shem, in unbroken line, had preserved from age to age a precious revealing of his will. The son of Terah became the inheritor of this holy trust. Idolatry invited him on every side, but in vain. Faithful among the faithless, uncorrupted by the prevailing apostasy, he steadfastly adhered to the worship of the one true God. The Lord is nigh unto all them that call upon him, to all that call upon him in truth. He communicated his will to Abraham and gave him a distinct knowledge of the requirements of his law and of the salvation that would be accomplished through Christ.
Amen. So what do we see here then? We see God.
Well, I certainly see that he preserved himself from idolatry,
In the inheritor of the holy trust.
and that he's also from that lineage where they received the inheritance.
So what had been promised to Adam? So what does she do here? She says he's preserved a remnant to serve him, and then she lists a few people, and she says in unbroken line. Is that an unbroken line? Who she put there?
Right to Shem.
I think so.
Adam, Seth,
Mhm.
Enoch, Methuselah, Noah, Shem. How many people there? 7. So Abraham becomes the 7th in this line. Is this all the people in the line? No, it's not, is it? So she's picked out 6 people before him here so that he becomes the 7th, which is prophetically significant that this is a complete picture. I'm sure it's not a coincidence that he's number 7 in this list that she's done. But she says in unbroken line. So what's the unbroken line? This is a broken line because these aren't all the descendants from Adam all the way down to Abraham, because it's about 21 generations. We know that Enoch's the 7th from Adam, which is interesting. So we know that that's not even complete, Adam, Seth, and Enoch. And then we know Enoch was the father of Methuselah, and Methuselah was the grandfather of Noah, because Lamech's in between. And then we've got Shem, the son of Noah. And in this chapter, the chapter we read about Abraham's genealogy, it traces Shem all the way down to Abraham. So she's picking out these people. Why?
Because they're faithful.
Because they're faithful. And so now she wants to make a point. He's preserved from age to age the precious revealings of his will. The son of Terah became the inheritor of this holy trust. So what was this holy trust? So she's saying he's become an inheritor of a holy trust. What's the promise made to Adam? Because it's been passed down from Adam. Genesis 3:15, isn't it? Famous. So this is a promise, it's a prophecy of the gospel. It's primarily, how does Paul apply it in the New Testament? He says this promise of the seed that will be born to the woman. So this is a promise of the Messiah. The seed. And I think Abraham understood this. So this holy trust has been passed down, and then it says, idolatry invited him on every side, but in vain. Faithful among the faithless, uncorrupted by the prevailing apostasy, he steadfastly adhered to the worship of the one true God. So here we see Abraham's chosen because of his faithfulness, and it's this promise that the Lord is near to those that call upon him. He communicated his will to Abraham and gave him a distinct knowledge of the requirements of his law and of the salvation that would be accomplished through Christ. So he has been given this knowledge of the law and of the fact that he's saved through Christ. Now, I don't know if that was given at the beginning, but the way she's writing this, it could be seen that it's given at the beginning. We know it unfolds as he goes on his journey, but we can be assured that he had some knowledge of the law of God, because this is how he's faithful, he's been obedient. So let's read the next paragraph. We got that? Somebody got that?
There was given to Abraham the promise, especially dear to the people of that age, of a numerous prosperity and of national greatness. I will make thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And to this was added the assurance, precious above every other, in the inheritor of faith, that of his line of the Redeemer of the world should come. In thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Yet, as the first condition of fulfillment, there was to be a test of faith. A sacrifice was demanded.
So here we see this promise is given to Abraham that was especially dear to the people of that age. So the people at that time really relished the promise that they would become the father of a great nation, that they would have lots of children, and that their name would be great in the land. So people had that ambition. So this was a promise that people held on to. So it would have been valued by Abraham. He would have valued this. And it was added the great assurance, precious above every other, to the inheritor of faith. So this was the most important thing to Abraham. That was more precious than in him having lots of children and being great, was the fact that of his line, the Redeemer of the world should come. So that's what we put up there. We see that he's given promise of a land, make him great, make him a great nation, and his name great, and that all families of the earth be blessed in the promise of the Messiah. And the one that was most important to him was this promise of the Messiah, that the Messiah would come through him. That all families of the earth would be blessed, and she links it to that in him all families will be blessed because of the Messiah. Yet, and then there's this contrast. So he's given all this promise, but there's a test of faith, or a sacrifice is demanded in this. So let's see what that sacrifice was. It's 126.4. Let's go to 126.4. We're just going to skip the next bit. So what she goes on to say is that the sacrifice or the test was that he has to get out from his country. And in order to be qualified for this work, he's got to separate from all the associations of his early life. I'll just touch on the sentence in the middle of that. The influence of kindred and friends would interfere with the training which the Lord proposed to give his servants. So in order to connect him to heaven, he must dwell among strangers. He could not even explain his course of action so to be understood by his friends, because spiritual things are spiritually discerned, and his motives and actions were not understood by his idolatrous kindred. So he's got this command to move, to go out, and because they're not in touch with God, they don't understand what he's doing, and they're clueless. And so he's told to leave them because it would interfere with his connection with God. For him to do this great work. So he's called to go out to somewhere he doesn't know where he's going, and his unquestioning obedience is one of the most striking evidences of faith to be found in the Bible. So he goes out by faith, and we're told this in Hebrews 11. It talks about him leaving the land and going out. And she says it was no light test that came on Abraham. It was no small sacrifice. So we know the opposite of that. It was a big sacrifice. There were strong ties to bind him to all those associations. But God had spoken to him, and his servant must obey. And the happiest place on earth for him was the place where God would have him to be. So then she talks in the next paragraph, 126.4. Can you read that one? It says, many are still tested.
Many are still tested was Abraham. They do not hear the voice of God speaking directly from the heavens, but he calls them by the teachings of his word and the events of his providence. They may be required to abandon a career that promises wealth and honor, to leave conjugal and profitable associations and separate from kindred, to enter upon what appears to be only a path of self-denial, hardship and sacrifice. God has a work for them to do, but the life of ease and the influence of friends and kindred would hinder the development of the very traits essential for its accomplishment. He calls them away from human influences and aid, and leads them to feel the need of his help, and to depend upon him alone. Then he may reveal himself to them, who is ready at the call of providence to renounce cherished plans and family associations, who will accept new duties and enter untried fields, doing God's work with firm and willing heart, for Christ's sake, counting his losses gain. He will do this as the faith of Abraham, and will share with him far more exceeding an eternal weight of glory, with which the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared.
So now she's making this a personal application to a more general sense from this story of Abraham. She's applying it to us. And so the question is, how does he call us? From that first bit, how does he call us?
The teachings of his word.
So let's say by the teachings of his word and
Events of his providence.
and you contrast that to what? How doesn't he call us?
How doesn't he?
Yeah.
Speaking directly to us.
Yeah. So he doesn't speak directly to us, like it seems to imply that Abraham was called in that manner, doesn't it? Because it says, many are still tested, as was Abraham. They do not hear the voice of God speaking directly from the heavens, but, so that implies that Abraham heard him speak directly from the heavens, the events of his providence, but he leads us by speaking to us through the word and the events of his providence. And then at the same time, we have this idea that he speaks to us in a still small voice, isn't it? So there's that level of a personal relationship with him, but these are the ways that he chooses to guide and lead us. Teachings of his word and the events of his providence. And then it says, what do they have to do?
Give up.
They have to give up something. Normally
Give up their occupation.
It may be the promise of wealth or honor and occupation. It may be that they're comfortable, they've got profitable associations, relatives, that they've got, they live in a nice house with them, but the people are heathen, their relatives aren't believers. And then it says to enter upon what appears to be only a path of what? So we've got to enter onto a path.
Self-denial, hardship and sacrifice.
self-denial, hardship, and sacrifice. Now, when people became, I want to try to apply it to ourselves. I want to think about this. If when you became a Christian or a Seventh-day Adventist, maybe you were raised a Seventh-day Adventist, maybe you became one, but maybe you made that choice at some point in your life to follow God. How many people felt that there was self-denial, hardship, and sacrifice? Did we feel that? Did people go through something to accept this truth? Or maybe perhaps when you joined the movement. So probably need to think about in your own experience how God called you. What were the events of his providence? What did you have to give up? Was it difficult? Was it a cross? Did you get opposition? Did you get conflict? And in that conflict, how did you react? What were the thoughts and feelings that you were going through? Did you feel severed from family and friends? Did you have opposition from them? You know, some people become Christian and they get death threats from family and friends. And we've got to think that everything we went through personally affected and shaped our experience. So whatever your childhood background was, however happy it was, however your parents treated you, is going to affect the decisions you make later and affects your Christianity. And even the decisions you've made as a Christian affect your walk now. And so I want us to think when we're looking at this, to try and apply it to our own lives and reflect and take it to God and reflect upon it. Because I think he's trying to teach us in this time period that we're going through the experience of Jacob. And Jacob's crippled by fear 20 years after this sin has been committed. So there's something in his experience that's damaged him. He's been forgiven for it. He's moved on. But that now he's gone back in his journey and he's looking at the past and he's retracing his steps. And he's going back to this experience that is now crippling him in the present time. So I am strongly thinking that and this experience is stopping him trust God, because fear is the opposite of love. It says perfect love casts out fear. And there's a lack of trust in God when you fear man. And so God's trying to teach him to trust him. And in this wrestling with the angel, he's learning how to trust God and to lean wholly upon his promises. And this is the lesson that God needs to teach us. As priests in this time period, I think we're going through mental struggles because he's trying to show us how to fully trust in God. We know that in the real Jacob's time of trouble, the close of Revelation, she says, all earthliness must be got out of Jacob. So there's some earthliness in there. And I think this is an attachment to earth. I think it's a symbol of attachment to physical things, but primarily to relatives, to friends, to emotional attachments and spiritual attachments that are not allowing him to fully trust God. And he has to have that complete dependence on God to pass this test. And so this is something that Abraham is being now pulled out of by God to show us physically what it looks like. So spiritually, we have to make that detachment. We have to detach from our country, our relatives, and our immediate family mentally. And we see that in the test of equality, because equality, one of the tests is racism and nationalism. And so right here, Abraham's told to leave his nation and go somewhere else. So it's a training ground not to be nationalistic, because you're uprooted from that background and you can't hold on to those things that give people support and security. And we may not be asked physically to do that, but mentally we have to do that. Mentally we have to separate from those ties or pushing them ahead of God. So in each of our experiences, I'm sure if we trace it back, we're going to see where we have issues with sexism, racism, maybe homophobia. I know that's a new one now, conspiracy theories, how those things have impacted our lives as individuals from way back. And each of us will have different things that we need to wrestle with to get over with God. But I think it goes deeper than we think. And that's why God's calling us to look back and see how this came about with Jacob. So we see he leads us with the teachings of his word, the events of his providence. So he shapes things for Abraham to go on this journey. Perhaps it makes it easier for him that his father goes with him and Lot comes as well. So God in his mercy did that for Abraham. I don't know. It doesn't go into all the details, but I'm sure that would have helped. But he now has to choose this path of self-denial, hardship and sacrifice, because it wasn't an easy thing then to move a whole household. And we didn't have removal vans and all the benefits of journeying that we have now with stopping places and hotels and, service stations where you can get rest and refreshment. This was a big sacrifice. But it says that if he'd chosen this life of ease and influence, God has a work for them to do, but a life of ease and influence of friends and kindred would hinder the development of the very traits essential for its accomplishment. So in order to accomplish this work, he needs traits of character that if he'd chosen to stay in his land, he wouldn't have had those character traits that he needed, that strength of character to stand for God single-heartedly and purposefully. So he calls him away from human influences, and just like he does with us, and leads us to feel the need of his help and to depend on him alone. So this is about depending on God alone. And I think this is the Christian walk. It's a continual journey of severing from human dependence to depending on God, and from depending on circumstances to depending on God by faith. So often we allow the circumstances around us to derail our dependence on God, and this is what Satan's trying to do. And the reason God wants us to do that is because he wants to reveal himself to us. And then the question is asked, who is ready at the call of providence to renounce cherished plans and familiar associations? And this wording is kind of echoing what Jacob goes through, because we're told about Jacob that he had to renounce cherished sin at the brook Jabbok when he has this wrestling. There's something that he's cherishing, this sin that he's cherishing. And we don't know what that looks like at this point, but I think if we trace this, we'll get some idea of what that sin is. Here, it's paralleling Abraham, and it's saying he has to renounce cherished plans and familiar associations. So we can cherish our own plans, and we can cherish our own relatives above God, and he's calling us to renounce them. Who will accept new duties and enter untried fields, doing God's work with a firm and willing heart? For Christ's sake, counting his losses gain. Who will do this has the faith of Abraham. He who will do this has the faith of Abraham and will share this blessing in the future. So it's promised blessings if we do this in the present time, if we suffer for him in the present time. So it's good for us to think about, I think, how we came to Christ and what we had to give up. Did anyone feel they had to give up anything when they came to Christ? So you didn't have to give up anything, Ray? Nothing at all?
Nothing major. Nothing that.
So you were raised Adventist?
No.
So you weren't already vegetarian or?
No, I was. Oh. It was a gradual process with me. Before I was in the church, God was changing my diet before I actually went in there. Right. So my experience is quite different from the majority of people. So he was like leading you gradually step by step to the point where you surrendered to him, that you had already made changes perhaps, but it was very gradual, so you didn't feel it. Yeah, that's what I mean. It wasn't just like I had to just stop something instantly, because it was gradual. Yeah. And I was able to that's why it wasn't difficult. And you didn't lose too many friends and associations over it? No. Was that because you didn't have that many, or they were on a similar page? I think I can answer that. I think it's only one person I've lost, to be honest with you. So you're still in touch with some people? Yeah, I guess it's because with one person we've just never like ever fallen out. We have that respect for one another. I wouldn't consider this individual to like hinder me, and I wouldn't hinder him. If anything, we tend to encourage one another. So he's an association for the past that you've kept. That's one, the only one perhaps. Yeah, there's a few that I would keep in contact with regularly. Like I'd call them first, and then I'd try with other people. So do you never feel that he's asked you to do anything that you didn't want to do? I didn't want to do. The cross. I'd have to think about that. It's worthwhile thinking about. I don't know. What about you, Tiffany? You have trouble?
Yeah, it was really hard. And it wasn't this message per se, it was before this message, but just my journey with the Lord. The closer I got to him, the more my friends were not accepting me, because I was pretty worldly. And so when I started giving up drinking or doing those things, I started losing friends, and it was hard. It was really hard. And then with even my family, when I started, stopped watching movies or going to the theater, then there was another like separation.
So the more that you embraced kind of what you thought God was telling you to do, the reforms, then the Alliance councils, but obviously the more you got trouble.
Yeah, like the closer I wanted to walk with the Lord, the further apart I felt from everyone.
And has that intensified being on the message, or do you think it was worse back then and it's not so bad now?
It did intensify, of course, once because I wasn't vegan at the time. I was just doing like simple things like, you know, the things that are like standard Christianity.
You give up the alcohol and
Yeah. Yeah, like just, you know, but yeah, as soon as I came into this, it was just another blow.
and every step of the way, maybe.
Yeah.
What about anyone else? Anyone else want to say anything about their experience? So Cassie, did you have any? What's your experience?
When I was born Adventist, but still when I was in Adventism, it was very liberal. So that was a step to get to separate, you know, from that liberality. And even as of today, when I meet my family, it's always a challenge, but because I don't eat meat, you know, and so there's this. I don't know why actually, but it's still conflict sometimes. I
So
think
what made you make those changes from, so you have a liberal Adventist background, what made you make the changes to become more conservative? Was it this message?
no, it was before the message.
Before the message.
Yes. It was actually when I had to leave my country, my kindred and my aunt's house.
So you literally left your country?
Yes, I literally left the country, and I think that this is when there was a real change in me because I had no more attachment, and it was really, really hard. And that, you know, make my walk with God more intimate, more close.
So you really had the experience of Abram in
Yes.
your own personal experience.
Yes.
That separating from those things actually did make you close to God, which is what God was trying to do with Abram.
Yes, and I think it was a very important step because when I'm from, not meaning where I'm from, but in my environment, family-wise, we're really close. And it's more like Mediterranean, Caribbean style. So the family has a lot of influence on what you do. And so I think that it was necessary for me to break through that. And so that the family is not the one making the decision, you know, even if you're married or not, you know. So I think for me that step was really necessary. And then, yes, when I came here, the change of lifestyle also made me give up many things, which was very difficult in the marriage, you know, because this is not how it was before. So yes, and then when I entered the message, it was the fact that I lost 90% of my friends, pretty much. But I was not ashamed, which I was glad, you know, to reach at that point, you know, to not be, to not look at what people say, you know, and because of everything that I went through, it really helped me to say, well, doesn't matter what you think, you know, doesn't matter what you believe, this is what I believe, and this is where I go.
So you can see how merciful God was that He led you step by step to go through these experiences to
Yes,
to the place where you are now.
yes, it was not easy though, and
No.
it was really hurtful, I found. Whether it's either on the personal side or a friendship side or even family side, I find that it was really painful. But I'm free.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. It was hard, but now I understand why the Lord, you know, brought me step by step. Yeah. So yes, I went through that.
Did your sister-in-law just going, yep. Yeah. Did you want to say anything?
No.
No. But you can appreciate the experience of Abram.
Abraham. Yeah, I think that everyone in different levels they live that experience, right? In my case, for example, I started very young to work in the church, Adventist church, I have a ministry of children, the sacred ministry. And I proposed me to work in jazz ministry, and no distract me. In that moment, I took a decision, let go of kind of distraction, like friends, or
When you accepted the chance. So you had a ministry in the church with children, and you were doing that from very early on. Then you came across the charts, and you accepted this prophetic message.
Yeah.
And then it became a part of distraction. What did you say?
No, I proposed me to let every kind of distractions, like friends or another kind of activity that can be distractions from the jazz work that can bring me. And I decided to work in my country, of course.
People try to, what are you saying? People try to distractions. Oh, distractions from doing that work. Okay.
But I can see now that the Lord opened us borders for me in my ministries, now teaching to not only Bolivian, not only my ministry, not only my children, around the world now.
Yeah.
Children. This is a blessing because this is make a great ministry now. And also my proposal was work for Bolivia, you know. It was my desire to help them. And the Lord is with me to help in every country now.
So now He's used the ministry that you have with children, and He's using you worldwide to minister to children.
Yeah,
That's always been a passion.
Yeah.
So that's if that's not so much of a cross for you as it would be for some other people, perhaps doing a ministry for children because you love it. But you, did you have much opposition from your family with this message?
Of course.
Yeah.
There was some opposition in the family. They call us extremists, and but they ignore me, can say, for a long time because
They ignore you.
yeah. I was waiting that I did this to be too extreme and something like that.
Yeah.
I think that I never understood that.
They're waiting to see that you get back
when you committed something to do with the Lord, you know.
Yeah.
But now the praise the Lord, they changing their mind. They start to change their mind.
Which is really good. I think another thing that impacts your life is obviously we're going to see this dynamic between Abram and Sarah, because she's part of this promise in the sense that's given to Abram. But we'll see what happens with her involvement in this plan. So another level of all of us are tested is when we've not only got our own baggage, we've got our own experience with God, our own trials and our own temptations, but once we get married, that adds a whole new dimension to it. Because now we've not only got our own experience, we've got our husbands or our wives we're dealing with and their families as well. And I think that has a big impact on the course of action. And we're confronted in those issues perhaps more under a magnifying glass with sexism, racism, homophobia, those things, especially if you marry someone outside your culture, which I know Sister Solange has and I have as well. And I think some of us have that experience here. Yeah. With marriage and with that cultural difference and the sexism, because we're different male and female. So I think all that impacts our walk with God. And so let's go back to Brother Henry, Brother Trevor, you don't want to say anything about your experience, the hardships of the journey. Does anything stick out, Brother Henry, that you found was really hard work? The cross, the self-denial.
I think that work is still continuing on.
I think so too. And I was going to share with my experience. I think God called me out of, called us to leave. My sister and I traveled the world when we left university, and I had worked a year at home, but we traveled the world, and it is in that time period when we were away from home in a foreign country, trying to earn a living, that we became Adventists. And I think when I look at the way God led me to that experience, we're thousands of miles away. When we get back home, we had an Adventist church around the corner, but I had never heard of Seventh-day Adventists. I didn't even remember noticing the church. I mean, we hardly ever went down that street, but it's around the corner from our house. We went a different way. And I just saw the mercy and the providence of God that He took us thousands of miles away to give us this truth, which was on our doorstep. But I don't know if we'd have ever accepted it if it had been at home that we'd heard it, because we would have been surrounded by the influence of our family. And when we did have contact with the church, when we came back home from traveling, about a year we'd been Adventist now, and they said they had visited our house, they'd knocked on the door, he'd even spoken to my mother, I think, and they'd given tracts through the door, but I had never had contact with them, I had never seen these tracts. So I don't know whether, it was God's timing. I don't know if you can say it's his will that you don't hear about the truth earlier, but it just seems like if it had been in a different environment, we might not have accepted it. So we're traveling the world, we're in the world heavily, we're drinking, smoking, partying, we're really in a mess, and we come across this truth and it's like a radical change. And so it wasn't perhaps such a cross because we weren't with our immediate family when that happened, but when we went back and how different we were, and we started losing friends and having arguments with people, we recognized, I think, as you went on the journey, what a cross it was. So it was a cross, and as you say, it continues to be a cross with this message that you lose friends and family, or that you're tested alone. I've never felt so, as an Adventist, I felt quite comfortable with a few people to fellowship with, but when I came onto this message, it felt like the Lord was saying, you can't trust in anybody, you can't rely on anybody to help you be saved. It's a lonely walk, because you get persecution from every side. You get persecution from your church, you still get, your family still, is in the background, and it's it feels like I always feel like from the beginning of being in this movement, he's severing our earthliness. He's just constantly, severing your dependence on the truth that you thought you knew that was saving you, the people that you thought you taught that truth, everything you've learned about conservative values and reforms is now being kind of like pulled out from under your feet. And at every step, it's like, Lord, what are you going to show us next? Because this feels like it's a constant severing. And especially if you've been Adventist for a long time, I think you feel like you've got so much to unlearn now. And in the movement for a long time, you thought you'd finally arrived at the truth, and you realize now that it's unraveling like a piece of, like a ball of string. And you think, wow, is anything solid? What are we standing on? Where are our feet in this thing? And he's just showing us the importance of the lines, that your refuge is in the lines. That's why I like the parable of the mustard seed. I'm just looking at those branches going, our refuge is in the lines. And I wanted to bring that out yesterday, I think I forgot, about the vision that Ellen White has on the journey, and the narrow way vision, where she's going with the baggage and with the horse and cart and the, and all the luggage. And as they go along, they've got to truck that luggage. And that's our experience. There's this severing of the depth of sin in our hearts that has to be got rid of in this process. So he puts us through these various trials and circumstances to show us what we're still holding on to, what we're still cherishing. And she says, on this journey, everybody has to throw everything off. And they get to the place where they've got shoes and socks, and they have to take the shoes and socks off because the path gets so narrow. And that has to be connected to the giving the gospel in some way. They've got this deeper understanding of the gospel, because people have beautiful feet who give the gospel. So it's about the feet. There's something about the feet there. And they throw the shoes and socks off. They see the blood on the wall, and it gets narrow and narrow. But at the same time it's getting narrow, what's happening? What are they holding on to?
The cord.
The cord. There's a cord they're holding on to, and as the journey goes, the cord is getting fatter and fatter. And a cord of rope is made up of many strands, and those strands are getting more and more. And I'm seeing in that imagery of the lines, they're holding onto lines, and now they're getting more and more lines, and they're holding more and more onto the lines. And the only thing they have when they get to the end of that journey, before that great chasm that they have to cross over, is this massive cord. It's as fat as a human being now. The way it describes it.
And they can't see where it's attached to.
And they can't see where it's attached, and they're going, who holds the cord? And then this voice comes, God's holding the cord. And it's like that's all they've got, is they've got to hold on to these lines that God has given them, and everything around them is falling apart. And then they have to swing across that chasm. And it's this dependence upon the message that God is giving us on his word alone. And if you link that to the other vision she has, where, does everybody know that vision she has, where she sees Jesus, she has to climb up some steps, and she sees Jesus in a room, and he gives her a cord. And she's told by the angel, or the angel gives her the cord. Do you know that one? The green cord. So just look at afterwards the green, just look at the phrase green cord, because it's a green cord she's given, and it's to ravel up, and she's to put it in her heart or hold it close to her bosom. And she's told after that every time she's lacking in faith, that she feels like she needs to be close to God, because she's feeling like overwhelmed with the ministry. She's told to do the ministry, that she's to unravel that cord and not to let it get too tighten up. She's got to let it loose. And I think even in the vision it tells you this cord represents faith, and this green cord represents faith, and green is this color of faith. And I'm thinking in the vision, she doesn't say in the other vision, the narrow way, what color this cord is, but I'm just thinking it's green. So it's linked to that idea that we've got to exercise faith, that we've got to completely trust the word of God to do what it says it's going to do. And this is the experience of Abraham. He's being called to step out and trust God at every level. So the first time he fails, is in chapter 12 here now, where we see, we're just going to read 6 and 7, and then we'll go to 10, and we'll see what happens to him. So 6 and 7, it says, and Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sichem, unto the plain of Morah, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. So God reiterates this promise here, that I'm going to give you your seed, this land. So you're going to have seed, and they're going to have this land. And then Abram builds this altar of thanksgiving and prayer, and offers sacrifice to God because of it. So he's reiterated his promise to him to give him comfort. So then he carries on the journey, and then we get to verse 10. If someone could read verse 10 to, I think it's 14, 10 to 16. So this is what happens now on the way. So we've got
10 to 15,
10 to 16.
16.
So we've got Genesis 12, 10 to 16.
And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, and she was very fair. The princes also of Pharaoh saw her, and commanded her before Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, and he entered Abram well for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen, and he asses, and men servants and maid servants, and she asses and camels.
So right here, we see this experience of Abraham where there's a famine in the land, and he goes down into Egypt. And we don't know if this was God's will or not, but I think he had to find a way out of this famine. And when he goes down there, the problem we see now is that he sees that his wife is fair, that she's beautiful, and he's afraid for his own life that they'll kill him if he says they're married, because they want to take Sarai, or Pharaoh, or somebody will want to take Sarai as their wife. And so he says this partial lie, thou art my sister. And why do I say partial lie?
Because she is his sister.
Yeah, because Ellen White tells us that she was the daughter of his father, but not of his mother, I think.
Yeah.
So they're related by one relative. So she actually is his half sister. But so he tells this lie, and then the princes of Pharaoh command her to be taken to Pharaoh's house. So the very thing that he doesn't want to happen, that he thought might happen, happens in a way. But obviously he doesn't get killed for it because they think he's the brother. And for Abraham's sake, which is interesting, in verse 16, he's given all these things that they give him. They treat him very well. So what's the issue here then? What's the issue, Sister Tiffany? What's going on? What's Abraham's problem?
Well, he doesn't really care about her.
He doesn't really care about her on one level. What's he afraid of?
Of dying.
He's got a fear of his own life, fear of losing his own life. So for self-preservation, what does he do?
He gives her away.
So he tells a lie. So he lies. So this is deception. And I don't know what he thought would have happened with this. What else could we label this? You said he doesn't really care about her. Has he got issues of sexism?
Yes.
I think he's got issues of sexism, right? Right here. He sees that she's beautiful, and he says, you know what, I don't want to die, so I'm just going to offer her as a sacrifice, in a sense, because he says, you know, she's not my wife, and he lies to them. And I don't know what he thinks is going to happen with that. He thinks now they'll be able to take her. I mean, reason this through, they'll be able to take her because I'm not her husband, And what does he think is going to happen to her when he does that? So he's almost willing for her to die in place of him, or at least commit adultery, somebody commit adultery with her. So I don't know what he conceptualizes. I don't even think that Pharaoh, if he thinks that far, that Pharaoh will take her. But she ends up being taken by Pharaoh. And on top of that, what happens? He gets blessed by Pharaoh for it. So what does that look like, really?
It's almost like a dowry.
It's almost like a dowry. It's like he gets paid as the brother, because he says she's my sister. So this is again issues of sexism, isn't it? So like a dowry, I think he always gets paid because they like her, and he's not even the father; he's the brother. So we see the patriarchal nature of this society, how it's male dominated, that he would get paid for Sarai. So we can see he's got big issues going on here. If we look at it on that level, that he's still got a lot to learn, even though he's chosen by God, he's listening to God's voice, he's stepped out in faith, he's made this great sacrifice, and he's trusted in God everywhere he's gone. He's built altars up to now, so he's walking with God. He's got to walk with God. He knows his voice, but he's got issues. He has a moment of faith lost there. His faith fails him for a moment under the threat of death. So we can see that a fear of death, of losing life, is a huge problem for most human beings. Death is one of the things that grips people. And then he lies, and he's got these issues with sexism, that he treats her not very well here. He pushes her to the front, and she gets taken into Pharaoh's court. So we'll just read, actually we'll leave this to next time because we've run out of time, but we're going to read Patriarchs and Prophets next session. So hopefully we can see that already these issues that are confronting Abram are similar issues to what we're confronting, and what we're looking at, that deep rooted within us, we have issues of patriarchal nature, of sexism, because we've imbibed lies about this, about how God operates and what he wants us to do at this time. We're still holding on to dispensational teachings about headship and sexism. And we'll see how this escalates in the story as we go down, and how this affects Jacob, because we know that the actions of the previous generations do affect the posterity. From even the commandments tell us that, until the third and fourth generation is going to visit iniquity. So what's that look like? And then we need to reflect it to our own experience. So let's pray, and we'll pick up this in the next lesson. Sorry. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your mercy and your grace in calling each one of us who are sitting here or kneeling here before you into your marvelous kingdom at this time. We know that you've not only called us physically to leave our kindred and our countries, that we are to leave behind issues of nationalism and sexism, but many of us have been called physically, but also spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. We have many things in our past that are affecting our walk today, and we pray that you would reveal it to us, that you would show us who we are, that we might be conformed to your image, Lord, that we might give up wrong concepts of you and wrong concepts of our fellow man. We know that at this time we're being tested on equality, and we know that for this to be a test, there must be deep-rooted issues in our own hearts that need to be got rid of, that you are confronting us with. We know it's only the beginning when we put on the trousers, but that inside there has to be a letting go and a relearning of how to interact with our brothers and sisters. Please help us, Lord, as we reflect back on our own lives, to have our eyes open to what you're trying to teach us. We know that many of us have made choices in the past, even as Christians, that have impacted our walk today, and that we see in the life of Jacob that the fear that crippled him was from an action that was done 20 years before. So we pray that you would guide and help each one of us to see what our own issues are, and to, in this time of Jacob's trouble, to put them away. We thank you now. We pray that you would bless us through the rest of this day. In Jesus' name, amen.
I want
Cold.
to.
Yeah, it's still pretty cold.
No, it is. It's cold.